What is a traditional family in today's society? This is a question I pondered when approaching this assignment, just because I would consider my family traditional, although I come from a blended family. For starters, I don't know my biological mom, only my biological father, which is already culturally different than most single-parent households. But at the same time, I don't consider to be raised in a single-parent household because at a young age my stepmom and step-siblings came into my life. My family would be one you consider a yours, mine, and ours family. My dad has 4 children, including me. My mother has 3 children, and together my parents have one. That's 8 kids altogether with 2 parents, because my step siblings don't know their biological father. But although I come from a blended family, we don't treat it that way. My stepmother is my mom, and my step and half siblings are just my siblings. Therefore, I was raised with the idea that I live what is known a traditional lifestyle, but my grandma reminded me that I really don't have an everyday traditional family, especially with 8 kids. Not only is my family structurally different than most, but my family is also ethnically diverse. As my father, 3 biological brothers, stepmother, half sister, and I are all white, my 3 step siblings share racial ethnicity of being Hispanic with their biological father. I know this is probably a little confusing, but my family structure is hard to explain. And to be honest, I feel weird explaining my family this way because I view my family as one. I don't like to pay attention to both the structural and ethnical differences within my family because it doesn't really affect me. And because I view my family as one, I feel my family is sort of traditional in that sense. Although many years ago our family would not have been considered or viewed as traditional whatsoever, in today's day and age it's becoming more and more common to come from a blended family. The conditions of my family's arrival in the U.S. is mostly unknown. I do know that my grandma on my dad's side is both Swedish and Irish, and she believes her grandfather came to the U.S. from Sweden and is not sure how her Irish family came about America. My grandfather, on the other hand, is primarily Norwegian, which is typical of Minnesotans. And again, I don't know my biological mother, so I'm not sure of my culture on that particular side, and my stepmom was adopted. She is white, just don't know where from. Most of my family is not originally from Minnesota. My father comes from a big city as he was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, as was my biological mother that I know of. I often question how my family ended up in rural Minnesota, but as my family before me was raised in Seattle, Washington, my dad and grandparents ultimately decided to migrate to Minnesota after my oldest brother was born for the slower paced lifestyle and the chance for a better place to raise children outside of populated areas. I personally come from a small town in rural Minnesota where everyone lives basically a traditional middle class lifestyle, including my own. It's a slower paced lifestyle with not a lot of cultural diversity. Therefore, during all my school years, I wasn't exposed to much of any racial conflict, ethnical diversity, or anything along those lines as it was primarily white. Wheaton, Minnesota's population is roughly 1,400 people. Because of the small amount of people, everyone knew everyone, and when new people came, they weren't always accepted, especially those of a different race, culture, economic status, self-identifications, etc. I acknowledged these flaws my town withheld and decided to go into education with the hopes to accept more than the people of my town did. Although I was raised in rural Minnesota with little cultural diversity, I was still raised not to acknowledge differences in a negative way because of my own personal family and the ethnical differences we share. So of course that's influenced me greatly in terms of how I view ethnic, racial, and religious diversity as a future educator. As a first-generation college student, I understand the importance of education. With that understanding, I hope to influence my students regardless of their personal identifications in a positive way, and I personally credit those views based on the experiences I've gained growing up from both my family and where I come from in Minnesota.